cord on this computer. Oh, okay, that's okay. So, and again, so the order of items here is first, Carrie Costello is going to give a brief description of the question, and then we'll let people who are speaking, who want to speak either before or opposed to the question, to have a few minutes to speak. We want to leave most of it for questions and answers. So Carrie, go ahead, please.
Hey, good evening. This is just going to be a big picture overview of the city budget process, just to set a context for the speakers that are going to discuss pro and con. I certainly would urge you to go to the City of Boston website under budget process. They have a YouTube, which is an overview of the budget process, and then there's any number of sections that you can take a look at with regards to the budget. It also outlines the budget process, the dates and the steps that are needed to be taken with the budget as well. So I'm going to just, again, I would urge you to go to the site for any more specifics. I'll just go over the big piece. Now, many of you have probably heard it said that the City of Boston's charter provides for a strong mayor, weak city council form of government. Well, what does that mean? And that is part of what we'll be hearing about tonight in terms of this charter amendment, which proposes to change the way in which the city has and does the budget process. The budget process begins with the chief executive officer, which is the mayor, and who then is charged to begin developing the budget for the fiscal year. The exception is the school committee budget. The school committee budget is in fact proposed by the superintendent, brought to the school committee. The school committee then sends that forward to the mayor. And then the mayor from there, as part of putting together the city's budget, would include that either again, plus or minus, because they have the authority under the current system to do that. They are responsible for that overall process. The city council, as many of us are probably aware, votes on the budget that the mayor sends. However, under the current structure, they cannot increase the budget that the mayor sends. They may move line items, but they cannot increase anything that comes from the mayor's office under the current model. And they have to have a 2/3 vote to vote on anything that may get vetoed along the way by the mayor. But again, the primary responsibility for the budget does rest with the mayor. And of course, the budget needs to be adopted. The city council does vote on that prior to July 1. And then there's benchmarks of dates that I won't get into. Again, if you're interested in that, it's all on the website about when these particular actions have to take place as the city develops the budget. And the city budget often does not get a unanimous vote from the city council. For instance, the budget for the year that we're going to enter into was not a unanimous vote. But did pass. It has to have a majority of the votes. It did have 8 votes to pass. So that just is the big picture. And now we're going to hear from our speakers, pro and con, about the language before us, which will be binding. And it is binding if it receives a majority vote of those individuals vote.
Okay. Armani White, I understand you're planning to speak in favor of this, so
yes, can you all hear me okay?
yes.
Yes.
I have some slides I'd like to show. Can someone give me the
I can make you the a co-host.
Thanks so much, and thank you all for having me today. Looking forward.
Sorry, David, you need to tell him how many minutes he has before we go to the other speaker and then open it up for questions, because I don't know how many minutes you thought you had. So let's make sure you're ready.
I'm not running a timer, but I'd like to keep your statement to about 5 minutes if you can. So
Okay,
great. Plenty of time for Q&A.
Awesome. And thank you for running through the process. Normally that's the longest part of what I would go through in my slides. I still don't seem to have screen sharing capabilities or abilities. When I click share screen,
make co-host. Hold on.
Thank you. Here we are. Hold on 1 second. We're gonna full screen this. Okay. So yeah, my name's Armani White, and I'm here with the Yes for a Better Budget Coalition. We are co-chaired by Center for Economic Democracy, which I work at. I'm the campaign director over there, and by Families for Justice's Healing, and Right to the City Boston. For background, Right to the City Boston and Families for Justice Healing are two organizations that have been doing racial justice work in Boston and Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Alston, Bright, and East Boston for many years now, and have been advocating for communities to have more say over the ways in which tax dollars are spent on their communities, whether that's at the state level, at the federal level, and at the city level. And this particular initiative came about particularly because of the murder of George Floyd, 2 summers now, which led to a racial justice reckoning, which led to city's budget process, the city's budget process here in Boston, but then also across the country to be looked at as an area of critique about the ways in which cities are or are not spending enough on certain communities. The Center for Economic Democracy, the organization that I'm a part of this effort, has been looking at ways in which we can reform government to ensure more racial justice and democracy. And are super in the weeds on the city charter. We actually have a study that we'll be releasing soon. So hope you all will take a read of that. It'll talk about the different ways that we think we should change the city charter. And David, I think you're giving off some noise here, by the way. But continuing on, just so folks know, right now, as I believe Ms. Costello, I missed your first name, mentioned, this is going to be a ballot question that folks will vote on this November when you go to vote, and Mayor Janey has signed off on it, so it's binding. And people often hear charter and they think, oh my God, we're talking about charter schools. Glad that we had this introduction. We're not talking about charter schools. We're talking about the city charter, which is a legal document that lays out all the essential rules for how our city government works. So what we're doing with this ballot question is amending how the budget process works, as the presenter before me spoke about. And I normally, like I said, I'd go through the budget process. I won't do that with you all because there's not enough time, but we're talking about changing how the operating budget process happens, not the capital budget, which is important to know. And it's important to know that we spent, that we have a $3.6 billion operating budget in the city of Boston. And when you think about what do we spend it on, this is the breakdown currently pulling from the city of Boston's budget. And what folks will notice here is that we have education, which is probably the biggest chunk of the pie, and public safety is next. Areas where you'd imagine there would be more investment, like in environment or arts and culture or housing, have share 8.1%. And there's more detailed numbers on the city website. But one would, some say that if there was more input by more city councilors, this would look different. So maybe more education, maybe more invested in housing and environment. So yeah, it's kind of setting the tone for what we'll talk about. And again, it's important to understand that this revenue, this money that we're talking about having more say in is our tax dollars, like comes from property taxes, state aid, and excise taxes. So currently, again, the process for the budget is a detailed one that you all should definitely research more, but it's important to know that currently, as it stands, the mayor, whether it be the acting mayor Kim Janey or the former for this current budget process, it was former Mayor Marty Walsh, is directed by the mayor's office, the Office of Budget Management, and the chiefs of different departments that the mayor has the power to appoint. So it's a very mayor-centric process. Currently, district councilors, there's 13 of them, as you all know, because you all are civically engaged folks. They have 2 votes on the budget. And I think the speaker before me talked about how the budget, has been contentious. While that's true, the budget has never not passed. And that's due to the structure in which the budget works right now, which I'll get into. But currently, 13 of them, they get 2 votes on the budget. And as the speaker before me mentioned, and I won't go through it in detail, currently the process stands, city councilors get a yes or no vote twice in June, and they have to pass the budget essentially before the end of before July, in order for the city to not go into a 1/12 budget where the city operates on 1/12 of the budget from the year before. That's like, 12 months in a year, so 1/12 of last year's budget, which doesn't allow departments that want to expand, that want to invest, that to be able to do that because there's no budget passed. So with our amendment, what will change is where we have a situation where the budget can be gridlocked over counselors that don't want to see the budget pass, or really strongly advocating for one piece, but have to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. Our amendment would actually allow city councilors to throughout the process, the public process that happens currently. If you all know about the budget process, there's a number of hearings that will happen at the chair of the Ways and Means Committee will host. But those meetings are more just informational sessions. The way that would change, and this is again an initiative that's supported by Councilor Kenzie Bach, this would allow city councilors to actually make line item amendments. They cannot increase the total amount of the city's budget, right? They're not able to say, okay, we magically have more money than the city's than the Office of Budget Management says. But this does allow them to tinker with the amounts within the restraints of the contracts that are signed with certain unions, et cetera, et cetera. And so this gives the mayor an opportunity to work closely with the city council to pass a budget that really speaks to all communities' needs. And it incentivizes the city council to work together as council members, and then also with the mayor to pass a strong budget. If there are 2/3 no vote, then the city council's proposed budget, if they vote on and support, will be the budget that goes into effect. So we do not end up in a situation where we have seen almost past these past 2 budget cycles where we may end up going into a 1/12 budget process.
Armani, could you wrap up in a minute or so?
I totally can. So
Okay.
what this does is it gives us increased democracy, right? We elect our city councilors every 2 years, our mayors every 4 years. And very briefly, so that's the one side of what this effort does. It's about giving city councilors more say in the budget process. What it also does, and I'll speed through these slides, is institute participatory budgeting in the city of Boston, which would take a portion of the city's budget and create a democratic process where community members can directly decide on how part of the budget is spent. And there needs to be further ordinances through the city council to determine the process for that and the design to make sure it's equitable and strong. I don't know if folks know about Cambridge's process, but some say it could be better, more equitable, and have more money in it. So there's work to be done here, but this amendment would mandate the city to begin an office of participatory budgeting with an oversight committee. And there's more to learn about participatory budgeting. If I had more time that I would share, but it is a really great way to drive up civic engagement, to have folks learn about the budget process, and people actually get their hands dirty in the sausage making of government, to understand how budgets work, what it means to fund a proposal, et cetera. And speeding through this, right now, we just need to get out the vote. We need to contact as many people as possible. We have a website with lots of great information, ways to sign up for lawn signs. Every single member of the city council and the AG has also approved this amendment. We have many endorsements, as I'll show here, including, I think I saw a Mass Nurses Association avatar on someone's Zoom. So good to see y'all here. But yeah, we have great endorsements from lots of great organizations, unions, nurses, community-based organizations. And the list is growing. Ward 1, Ward 4, Ward 15 Democratic committees are supporting this. Lots of great organizations. So I'll stop there because I know I'm at time. But if you want to learn more, I'm going to go ahead and drop our website in the chat box so you can look there. And if you'd like to request me to come talk to another organization, your church, anything at all, or your place of worship, please let me know. Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, who is if somebody wants to volunteer that they are here to speak on behalf or against this proposal before we go to question and answer?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Elaine Beatty, who works for the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and she can tell us her title. Sorry, I don't know that. And she will be speaking on the con side of this issue. Elaine?
Elaine, do you want to share any slides or?
I do not have any slides
Okay.
tonight to share.
Then go right
Sorry,
on.
the day just got away from me and putting slides together. I am Elaine Beatty. I'm from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. I am a senior strategic advisor at the Research Bureau. And I am here. I'm so glad that you are able to invite us and I can join you for this discussion because I think it's a very critical and important discussion for the city's fiscal future. I think the previous two speakers very much outlined that Boston's budget process is very complex and involved. All total, it's well over a $6 billion corporation. And we have a mayor that is essentially the CEO of that corporation and is elected by a very democratic process by the entire city of Boston. And voters that expect the mayor to act as a CEO and set and implement a direction for Boston based on the needs of the entire community. As you know, those directions and those goals come to fruition in the city's annual budget, which the mayor is accountable for, and the city council is the checks and balances for. And that's really the crux of the strong mayor form of government. You did go over, the many agencies. The budget process starts well before the April budget is supposed to be submitted to the city council. There's hundreds of departments, people and departments that are involved in this. They develop spending priorities, revenue estimates to ensure a balanced budget, determine the amount of non-discretionary expenses that will be required, in order to create that viable budget for Boston that's also in compliance with state, federal laws and regulations. I think, Armani, I think you said exactly what changes with question one. The mayor is still responsible for submitting the budget. The big difference is the city council doesn't just reduce or approve the mayor's plan, but it also has the authority to essentially make its own budget proposal, which could very well fund an entirely different direction and set of priorities for the city, so long as that it costs no more than just the bottom line. If the mayor does not agree with those council priorities, the council will still prevail if they get a 2/3 override vote. Which brings me to the first of three major concerns that we have, which is first is fiscal stability as a major concern. Boston has gone through decades of thoughtful legislative change to achieve the financial stability and ensured accountability that we see today. We are far away from the brink of bankruptcy and deficit spending and of the fiscal instability of the late 70s and early 80s. And the rating agencies, in fact, consistently cite Boston's strong fiscal management as reasons for the AAA bond ratings of the city. This allows the city to effectively deliver on their capital plan, whether it be roads and schools and buildings or dealing with climate change and green jobs and housing. It allows the city to achieve those goals at a sustainable cost because they have a very good rating with the rating agencies. The proposed structure is clearly not based on a strategic use of taxpayer dollars. It's really a process that's reallocating money for special interests of projects. The second area that we are concerned about is accountability and the chaos. I think the intent is to unleash that gridlock when in fact, I think what we believe ends up doing is creating even more gridlock. For under question one, this responsibility of the budget will be divided among 9 district city councils and 4 at large. Dysfunction and chaos will be common as councilors will compete among each other to get their issues included in the city council budget proposal, and then put the council priorities even further in competition against the mayor's. So if the desire is to get rid of gridlock, it's really ensuring that gridlock is there and alive and well. It calls for decentralized leadership, with by its very nature, makes it difficult to hold one person accountable. Right now, citizens are able to express their like or dislike, their support or not support of the actions of the mayor during a very democratic electoral process. With question 1 in effect, the electorate can only vote in and out for just their district city councilor or the district or the councilor at large. Any strategic direction set by the mayor at the beginning of the year via a campaign or the state of the city address or through community forums can be upended by the city council.
Elaine, could you wrap up in a minute or so, please?
Sure. The last thing that I'd like to highlight, excuse me, is the capacity of the city council. Question 1 will challenge the capacity of the city council. Boston's operating and capital budget, as you've heard, is very complex and involves lots of people and departments. The city council structure and central staff is just not prepared to execute the type of analysis and evaluation or forecasting for a over $6 billion budget. In fact, year after year, the city council's Ways and Means Committee that is charged with reviewing the annual budget consistently submits a report, as they're supposed to, by the second Wednesday in June. Not that the budget should be rejected because of specific concerns, but they say, please, we need to reject this budget because the city council needs more time to review. So in the end, to create a plan and priorities independent of the mayor and the administration, it's just going to tax the capacity of the city council. We just don't need to add more complexity to the process and more gridlock and less inclusivity for this. Is there room for improvement? Of course, always there is. But changing the structure in this kind of way is not the way we get at those improvements. And we shouldn't forget that the Boston City Council currently has several important roles in the budget process and throughout the entire fiscal year that it should utilize in order to bring about change in city government.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got about almost 20 minutes remaining. So if people have questions, please put up the little hand on your, if you can, that's as part of your Zoom session. And when you ask your question, please indicate, if you want to ask it of a specific person or just throw it out for each person to answer. And let's try to keep the questions and answers brief. So Helen?
Yeah, I would like Armani to comment on some of the research that they've done about other cities that are Boston's size that have where the city council is more involved has more power in the budget process.
Yeah, you can hear me okay? Yeah, so we actually had some of our research team look into cities of similar size to Boston and found that most of those cities, or excuse me, all those cities, councilors have budget power, and there's no negative effect on their city's bond rating. There was an argument that the Boston Municipal Research Bureau made earlier on that participatory budgeting would hurt the city's financial standing, and in cities and towns of comparable size that have participatory budgeting, they too have strong bond ratings. So it's a unsubstantiated claim, in my opinion. And the information on this can be found more on our website. We have a link to that report. Was it here? That's a great question, though. Yeah.
Elaine, did you want to speak to that at all?
In terms of other cities that don't have their impact, or there is no impact on their
David, I asked the
ratings.
question to Armani. I don't,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
you said we should direct the question,
Yeah.
so I,
Sorry, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Bill Chevelle?
Well, to one or both, though, I think
Yeah.
we need to be clear. You
Yeah.
can do it to one or
Right.
both,
Yes.
was our ground rule.
I- Except that I think it's fair to have both respond to a question, but
Me too.
Oops. Yeah, in this case, let Elaine answer that question, and then Bill, you'll go next.
So Helen, could you just repeat your question again? Sorry.
I could ask you a different question. I was asking Armani about the evidence of cities the size of Boston that have, where the city council has more control over the budget. And I mean, I agree with Armani that you're making unsubstantiated claims here.
I think most of the major cities in the United States are strong mayor forms of government, where the mayor
What's your
is
evidence
the-
for that? Give me some examples. I don't think you're right about that.
May I respectfully remind us all that we are asking questions and not debating with our presenters? Thank you.
I mean, I would happy to, can't send it right now, but I can send you the strong mayor form of governments throughout the US. Happy to do that. I can do that through Carrie
Okay, thank you.
tomorrow.
Okay, okay, Bill Chevelle, your question next, and if you want to direct it. Otherwise, we'll give both a chance to answer.
no, I would like both reactions. And so I have a concern in this particular city council group happens to be terrific. I can't say that I'm dislike any of them, and I think they come from the right place. But democracy is complicated. It's very hard work. I look at Washington and I see their inability and their deadlock and so on. And so how do, in both of your proposals, how do you prevent this provincialism? Everybody loads up the budget with their individual needs, and that squeezes out citywide concerns. And I'd
I
like
think-
both to answer.
Elaine, you want to take that one first, and then Armani, you can answer as well.
Sure, I think that is the problem with passage of question one, is that it does take away the accountability. The mayor is accountable for the direction of the budget, for accomplishing or not accomplishing pieces. The city council has a very active role as the checks and balances throughout the entire fiscal year, meeting with community groups, bringing those concerns back to the administration. The administration needs to continue to reach out to community groups to really create a clear plan that addresses all the needs of the city, that doesn't provide for the creation of kingdoms or the creation of special groups who happen to be the loudest voice, get the most dollars, whether they need it or not. There needs to be that CEO in charge, that mayor in charge that we can hold accountable. When the city council changes every 2 years, it's really difficult to get that accountability.
Hey, Armani?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it speaks to the first question that was asked about what is the evidence behind the theory that this would create instability, that more democracy creates instability. There's no evidence for that. Right now in the city of Boston, we've seen instability in the budget process. If anyone has been tuned into the budget process the past 2 years, it's been really contentious, almost not passing. This process is one that's supported by majority of the city councilors as a process that would make the process less contentious. So I think the folks who are actually, part of that process are supporting it. And, the candidates who are running for mayor currently also support this initiative. Anissa Sabi George supported this, Councilor Wu supported this, Councilor Anissa Sabi George, Councilor Wu, Councilor Campbell, all supported this effort, as did Acting Mayor Janey. So to me, I don't see or foresee any type of instability created through this, and actually think that the current process is more unstable as we see it. I think that we talk about inequity in the city of Boston. The current process, as it stands, as a part of what we know to be the inequity in Boston, or has been a part of maintaining it, if not working to better it, and at the same time not reaching that mark fully. So I think these changes, as shown by organizations like unions that are citywide, shown by business leaders, this is a good democracy reform, and it's something that would not cause the type of confusion that I think folks are saying.
Next question, Hishan, your hand is up.
Thank you very much. I actually was here to listen to the presentations, but I feel a couple of questions coming on this. I used to actually work in the budgeting process with the budgeting folks at City Council when I worked as a policy advisor for a former city councillor. And just as a clarifying question, Ms. Beatty referenced the fact that the budgeting analysts are overwhelmed, and it's one of the reasons that's given for the rejection of the budget at the beginning of June. I just want to clarify that when I was there, that was actually a ceremonial vote. And the reason given is a ceremonial reason to delay the budget until the third Wednesday, I believe, which is what the city charter is, which is what the requirement is when you have to pass the budget. So I feel a little strange about listening to that, because I know that they're extraordinarily capable professionals who I had the honor of working with. I just wanted to ask Ms. Beatty something that you brought up.
Excuse me, if you have a specific question, otherwise there's several people
I
waiting.
do. Thank you, David.
Please.
Yes, may I ask my question? Thank you. Ms. Beatty, I was just wondering, you talked about the loudest voices would win over. And I'm just wondering what you would say if I said, actually, the arguments that you're making are the arguments for this, because from where I stand, it has been the loudest voices that have won most of the money, in particular the police unions, for example, simply because you back the candidate, the CEO that you call them. And I don't see the concerns that you're bringing forward. I am actually seeing.
Right, so is that a question for Elaine to address that, please?
Yes.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Thank you for the question. It's a loaded question. First, with the police unions, the collective bargaining contracts are approved by the city council. And the reason why we have the accelerated costs of the police contracts is specifically because several years ago, after binding arbitration, when the last stop for the police union contract was the city council did not want to take a stand on that, essentially adding to the future costs that we see today. So that is definitely a role that the city council could have exercised, and they really didn't. In terms of the ceremonial vote, legally, by law, the city council has to act by the second Wednesday in June. At that time, there's nothing that prohibits the city council from actually writing a report, the Ways and Means Committee writing a report that says, here are the concerns that we have. This is what we want to see out of the budget. These are the people that are neglected in this budget. We don't see that. We don't see that articulated, and the city council is the first to say, well, everything's behind the scenes, when they could take the steps to make the process more transparent by starting with that first vote and saying, hey, we've spent all of these hours and time reviewing this budget, and this is what
Okay.
This is what we think. These are our concerns. And
Okay.
Mayor, you need
Okay, thanks.
to
We
deal with
need,
that.
I want to go on to some further questions. Ryan or Lisa?
Yeah, it's me, David.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this would be to both folks. Armani mentioned some of the folks who had endorsed, so I'd like to hear if we could, get a snapshot of some of those people who have endorsed, and if also Ms. B could mention some of the folks that have endorsed, or who the people are, who contribute to the Research Council, if that's possible.
Okay, Armani and Elaine, if you could provide those lists of people who have endorsed or not endorsed, could you either post it in the chat window or send it to us so we can do it rather than reading a list of names and taking time here. Okay, Carrie?
Yes. How much time do we have for questions? Because I'm willing to pass if.
Yeah,
if-
we only have about 5 minutes left, so let's.
All right, well, I'll make, then, okay, I'll be quick then. I would have deferred, but I'll be really quick. I'd like to hear a little bit about the participatory committee or body, whatever it's being called. I understand the acting mayor has put money in the budget to fund it at, I believe it's $1 million. I guess anticipating this might pass. And of course, why wouldn't the city councils all vote for it? It gives them more power and authority, just as an aside. But I'd like to just a quick, if I could, maybe both of you just talk briefly about what is this participatory body? Who would be on it? How would it help? Maybe like 30 seconds, like a quick from each one of you. Thanks.
Okay, Armani?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yes, so the participatory budgeting, there would be an office that would be staffed like a regular city department. And then there would be an oversight board would be made up of advocates from across the city. In a similar way, in the way that currently there are community, like government boards that inform city processes, whether it be American Rescue Plan or what have you, what other, other pots of money. And then the actual process and design would be determined through ordinances that would have to be passed through city council. And so this would just mandate that the city do it. It doesn't actually describe the detail. And that's going to be something for all of us here as voters and folks who are civically engaged to participate in forming.
Okay.
And we're working
Elaine,
with,
do you want to add to that?
I have one little piece if I can. I'm
Yeah.
working with the Office of, with the Participatory Budgeting Project, which is a organization that's worked with cities, governments across the globe to support them in developing participatory budgeting processes. And, we have it right next door in Cambridge, so it's not a super foreign concept.
Okay, Elaine?
Oh, yes, there is no structure around it right now. It's all just a concept that it will be a fairly big board, it seems like, and the structure of it is to be determined. I think the Attorney General outlined in her letter, and I was just trying to find the words that she used, that there is some concern over who these people are, what the structure of it is, and who are they responsible to? So that all has to be worked out.
Thank you. Next question, Glenda Buell.
Hi, yeah, this is to Elaine and Armani. If we do pass this question 1, and it does lead to more fiscal instability in Boston, how easy would it be to roll back the budget process to the way it is now?
Elaine? I'll then go for, I'm alternating between you.
How easy would it be to go back? Well, if it's a binding question, my sense is that it would have to go back through the same process. It's still questionable. The Attorney General was still not very clear that this was the appropriate route for, I guess it's the appropriate route for the question, but the Attorney General was not able to say whether this was a major or a minor amendment to the City of Boston's charter. And that's kind of key in determining how you can change legislation surrounding the city charter. So, I mean, essentially, you would have to go through, you'd have to go through another referendum. Anyone could create a taxpayer lawsuit against this as well. I mean, that's pretty much the only options that I can think of off the top.
Okay, Armani?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways to change city charters. This is one of the ways, a charter amendment. And so we would be able to do the same thing again to do it. So it'd be pretty easy to answer the question. And just for the record, the Attorney General did approve this amendment for its constitutionality, that it is not a minor, that it's not a major change of the city charter, because if it would, that would have required a home rule petition, and this did not. So the Attorney General has said this is
thanks.
proper.
Thank you. We got one more question. We have one more
actually, if I can just say that it did not. She specifically said it is unclear whether it qualifies as a wholesale revision that must be accomplished by convening a charter commission as opposed to an amendment. So, and therefore we cannot conclude that the council's utilization of this creates a conflict. So just because it didn't create a conflict, they kind of opened the door for a lawsuit.
Chris and Elizabeth, you get the last question. Please make it brief so we can stay on schedule.
Thank you. This is more of a process question. I'm not sure who to direct it to, but what would this mean for the workload of the department heads and the city admin staff? Is this kind of just creating two budget processes happening simultaneously?
Okay, Armani, you want to take that first?
No, this wouldn't create two separate budget processes. This would, the Office of Budget Management department chiefs would still be a part of and leading the process. City councilors would be able to get in the mix sooner, hopefully, and be able to amend the budget in certain departments where they see fit.
Okay, Elaine, do you want to add anything to that?
The city council will get involved at the same time in April with the budget submission and be able to readjust the budget as they see fit from April to June. It could or could not, and add more to the staff in city government, as well as to their own central staff and own individual staffs.
Okay, well, thank you both for taking on the sides of this. Thanks everybody for the questions. Let's proceed right on to the question about the question about the school committee. And Carrie, could you give the summary of the school committee question? Oh, unmute. Carrie, you need to unmute.
Sorry. This is just a brief overview to give us all a context of the history of the appointed school committee in Boston. As to why it occurred, I'm not going to get into that, but I want to give us just a few dates. In 1981, there was a referendum that called for a 13-member committee. 9 were elected by district and 4 at large. They served 2-year coterminous terms, meaning the whole group ran for election every 2 years. Just something to bear in mind as we think about this question. Then in 1989, there was a non-binding question around, again, the school committee structure and should we change it or not? And that changed, and should that be then? And they came up with 7 as the 7-member board. That would be appointed by the mayor. It would be approved by a nominating committee that would screen. People would apply. There would be a process. They would apply to the nominating committee. The nominating committee would then be charged with forwarding names for consideration to the mayor. So it was not just a carte blanche that the mayor could, nominate and appoint anyone he or she would choose. It was always a he up until now. This was a non-binding question at the time. The vote in favor, 37.3, the vote against, 36.2, hardly an overwhelming mandate. It's interesting to me to see that. Then there was a home rule petition that did have to go to the legislature, approved by the mayor and the city council. That was in 1991. And then the first appointed school committee took office and began their work in 1992 to give us all historical context of what happened in the process. As to why we arrived there, we'll hear more about that from our speakers in terms of that. What we will say is with that change, what happened is and I want to remind us all the role of a school committee. The role of a school committee, one, is to hire and fire the superintendent, fire, evaluate the superintendent. It is they have a fiduciary responsibility to monitor the budget. They set policy. They are not supposed to be interfering in day-to-day in operational or personnel matters. That is really boiling it down to the three responsibilities of any school committee. And prior to the appointed group coming in, the school committee consistently overran their budget year after year with no regard for any parameters at all, which was part of what led to some of this movement to should we change it or should we not? And that was one of the factors that came up. And another that you would hear about if you look back at the arguments at the time, pro and con, was that policy matters were being left aside and in the dust as people jockeyed for other political kinds of positions and what was going to happen. So a lot of that was really that unrest about what was happening with the committee and their failure in some voters' eyes to focus on what they needed to do in terms of not only just the budget, but the hiring of the superintendent, et cetera. And just to remind us that the first superintendent hired under this new model was Tom Payzant, who did stay for 10 years. And having a stable superintendent does matter and does make a difference. And we didn't have a lot of that happening either. So that in a nutshell is how we have arrived at an appointed school committee. I did some research. Esther helped me out. We found 3 to 4 cities that have appointed school committees other than ourselves: Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and there was one other escaping me at the moment. That was not an exhaustive search, but we just wanted to give folks a little bit of a context. Almost everywhere else they are elected. They serve 2 to 4 year terms as a rule. They're all staggered terms, and they all elect their own chairperson or whatever title they give them among themselves. The mayor, in none of those cases, appoints the chair. The bodies themselves appoint their chairperson for whatever term they may choose among themselves. Could be 1 year, could be 2, similar to what the city council does now in our city. So that's it in terms of an overview.
Okay, Kristen Johnson is asked to speak and also to present the screen, so I'm going to make you a co-host.
Great. While you're giving me co-host capabilities, I just want to share my appreciation for all of you. My gateway drug into Boston politics was city budgeting, more specifically school budgeting, and that's how I became so involved. So that was like a riveting conversation, and I love everyone's level of engagement on this stuff. So let me see if I can share. So I am a longtime resident of Jamaica Plain. I've lived over behind Doyle's, may he rest in peace, for the past 20 plus years. Let me just share my slide deck. Great. So I'm here as a volunteer representing Yes on 3. As I mentioned, I'm a Boston parent. I've got 2 kids in DPS, and that's was my entry point into all of this stuff. So our ballot question, the the weight behind it comes from all these citywide organizations, most notably NAACP Boston, Boston Teachers Union, Quality Education for Every Student, Boston Education Justice Alliance, where I have civil rights associations and political organizations all across the city banding together behind this question. So this is a non-binding advisory question, unlike Armani's. So the question is going to read, should the current appointed school committee structure be changed to a school committee elected by the residents of Boston? And we wanted to sort of leave it open like this so we could begin a citywide conversation. We'll go more into our intent later. So Boston is the only municipality in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I think there's something like 350 odd school districts. Ours is the only one that has an appointed school committee, and nationwide, we see a similar trend. I've examined really comparable cities to Boston, and about 77% of them have elected school committees, and 23 have appointed. Notably, Chicago has just done the legwork to go back to an elected school committee from appointed. So this is different than a binding referendum in that you only need 10 voters to support it to get it onto the ballot. So we wanted to get 10 really special people. So among them is Tanisha Sullivan, chair of NAACP, Mr. Armani White, who you just met, Sunny Pai, who's a fantastic educator living in Jamaica Plain. But here is my personal favorite, Dr. Jean McGuire, who was the first Black woman elected to the Boston School Committee in 1981. And this was the result of literally decades of organizing in the Black community. And she's astounding. She's supporting our effort. There's a really great GBH piece you can read about her there. Another supporter is Reverend Willie Bodrick. Sorry, I can't read with my picture here. It says, he said, an elected process engages people. It's going to have people going door to door to ask questions about their children's and families' experiences. This leads us to identifying the problems, encouraging the district to do better, and engaging families so that all the children have the best opportunities. So, Carrie, thank you for touching on the history. The history is really my specialty. I spent about 6 months in the city archives and read every single article printed anywhere and found some really fascinating things. So we weren't alone in the move to going appointed. This was sort of a package of education reforms that was getting foisted onto urban districts across the nation, and in part due to the disruption of desegregation. It was like to kind of seize control of school committees in urban districts. So, as Carrie just mentioned, it was a non-binding ballot question in '89. It passed with a razor-thin margin, but nonetheless, the city council and then finally the governor passed it. One of my discoveries was that Mayor Flynn changed his mind. So as most of you know, he left to become an ambassador to the Vatican. And as he left, he wrote a letter to everyone running for mayor saying that it still bothered him that people had been disenfranchised by something that he did. So he wrote a letter that said the appointed board has done what it has to do. It has accomplished a clean break with the past. So Carrie also referenced the past, and which is really my area of study. So if you think about the school committee, someone's going to say Louise Day Hicks within seconds if you say Boston School Committee. So what's interesting is Louise Day Hicks left the Boston School Committee in 1969 to run for city council, and we lost our right to vote 23 years later. So I was really fascinated with what happened in between. And in between, we had John D. O'Brien elected first Black school committee member in 77 years. And then, as Carrie mentioned, we got a different structure of our board that made it more diverse. They went on to select the first Black superintendent of BPS and the first Black woman superintendent of BPS. And then in 1992, we lost the right to vote for these
Kristen,
numbers.
could you take a couple more minutes and wrap it up, please?
Absolutely. as you can see, there's sort of two different sides to the story. And the one that never gets told is these missing years of the Boston School Committee, when we had a larger, more diverse body, more women, more people of color serving on the board. So in the Globe, an editorial even noted that just as the Black community was gaining political power, this platform was taken away from them. So why now? You only have to read the paper to see how 4 members have resigned in the past year. People overwhelmingly support this. A poll found that over 60% of Boston voters support an elected school committee. And we as a coalition just feel now is the time, in the light of racial reckoning in America, to return the right to vote. And so what will happen when we win, which I know we will, there is an open home rule petition that's been filed in the city council. It's intended to be a starting point for discussion. When we win, it's non-binding, and then we want everyone to engage in designing what our school committee is going to look like in terms of structure. So that's it. There's lots of opportunities to get involved. Most of all, just tell your neighbors about this campaign, because we're a brand new campaign. We're not anywhere near as established as Yes on One. So you can donate, you can volunteer, just check out our website and follow us on social media. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Kristen. Is there anyone else who wants to speak formally, or can we go straight to questions here?
It was my understanding that Esther was going to just raise a few thinking points,
Okay.
if you will. If not, I'm
Yep.
happy to do so.
No, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Ready? Okay. So I'm Esther Kaplan, for those who don't know me. And I want to start by saying I have complete empathy for parents who want change. As far as I'm concerned, education is the most important city service. And the BPS are in worse shape now than they were 8 years ago. That is tragic for all of us. And now we have adults fighting about power and control. My purpose tonight is to help you consider if the proposed change to the school committee would lead to the changes we all want. My only question is, what's going to help more Boston students get a better education and be prepared for life? And you may notice that I'm not going back to that old history. I'm not talking about the long history of racism in the on the school committee and the corruption in the school committee. I'm really hoping that Boston is better than that now. I'm talking tonight from my experience in the 1990s, when I was a nonprofit provider to the schools and the point person advocating for arts education in the BPS. And with colleagues, many of them who lived in JP, who focused on science, on special education, on bilingual education, on vocational education. We sat through and testified at dozens of elected school committee meetings, and then at many appointed school committee meetings. I was doing this during the transition. And all of us would tell you that nothing happened with the elected school committee. Only a few members knew anything about education. You can point to Jean McGuire, but you're not mentioning all the other people who were elected who knew nothing. The members also did not work well together because their interests lay in getting individual credit, not in getting things done. JP was more racially and economically diverse back then than it is now. And this neighborhood had one of the highest rates of sending kids to the Boston public schools rather than to private, parochial, or Metco schools. We had very knowledgeable, invested parents. And you should know that Ward 19 across racial and ethnic lines voted for an appointed school committee at a higher rate than any ward in the city. And that was because the elected school committee had failed their kids. So as Carrie mentioned, one of the most important tasks of a school committee is to hire and supervise the superintendent. That's who runs the system. Being an urban superintendent is probably the hardest job in the country. Change happens really slowly over many years' time. With the elected school committee, superintendents came and went. After a year or two, this member wouldn't like them or that constituency wouldn't like them, and their contract would not be renewed. As Carrie said, the appointed school committee recruited the top prospect in the country, and Tom Pezant stayed for 10 years. We became the most improved urban school system in the country. He was not perfect. He did not get everything done, but we made real progress, and that's reality. And he would not have come here if we had an elected school committee. Good superintendent candidates have a choice of job offers, and strong superintendents don't want to have 9 or 12 elected bosses. I would suggest you wouldn't either. Sometimes school committees have to make tough decisions that are not popular in the short term, but they're necessary for long-term improvement. Shielded from direct political payback, appointed members are more likely to make those tough decisions. Elected ones back off the moment some constituencies object.
Esther, can you wrap up? We do have one question.
A little bit more. What do you need on a school committee? You need that intersection of diverse cultural perspectives, of knowledge of lots of different topics, and experience with management of large systems. The appointed school committee was more diverse than the elected school committee ever was, and frankly, of the city council is now. And the school system is way more diverse than the city or the people who vote. Most voters in the city have no direct experience of the Boston Public Schools. They are not voting on the basis of knowledge. School committee members, I think last I knew, were paid about $7,000 a year. That means they have full-time jobs. Many are parents. They spend 20 hours a week on school committee, and then they're going to raise funds and run a campaign. Who's going to do that? And who's going to be funding those campaigns? What spheres of influence? My guess is corporate interests, wealthy individuals, unions, vendors.
Esther, we need to give a chance to answer.
Okay, so what I'm going to say is, personally, I think a hybrid school committee is probably what makes sense. Maybe adding a few elected members to the appointed. But the proponents who wrote this are not giving you that option. So if I vote, giving me the option, if I vote yes, they're going to claim that a large majority want a fully elected school committee. So what I'm hearing is the only way to support a hybrid is to vote no, and then there'll be negotiation. Thank you.
Ryan or Lisa, you had a question.
Yeah, David, actually, thank you. So just as a point of clarification, before I ask my question, will we go over the individual questions in discussion post the presentations?
I don't know if we have a reference to the specific. You're talking about the text of the question?
No, it's not in the agenda. But will we have a time for discussion about the questions following the presentations?
Well, that's what the Q&A here is for. I don't see any other questions outstanding right now, though.
Okay, great. So yes, I do have a question in particular related to this, and I'd like it to be addressed actually to both. Since Esther, thank you for your contribution to both folks. Do either of you, it's okay if you don't, have the current racial diversity makeup of our Boston Public Schools?
I do. Hold on.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Yeah, great. Thank you. So how diverse are our public schools compared to other larger municipalities? And I don't know if this is possible to ascertain, but
yeah,
how does having an elected school committee, would that make us more diverse versus other communities or not? I guess.
Yeah.
Chris,
Okay, so the demographics, just to give you a sense, are, I just looked them up today, 42% Hispanic, 33% Black, 14% white, 9% Asian American. Okay, and one thing that I think is always noticeable is 50% of students in the Boston Public Schools speak a language other than English at home. So it's extremely diverse. We're not talking about Black, white, and Hispanic. We're talking about African immigrants and Cape Verdeans and people from Central America. It's just incredibly diverse, and you're never going to get that diversity by who happens to run for office and who gets elected, because you need the cross section of the skill sets and the knowledge of everything from special education to budget management. You need to be able to do the cross of the cultural representation and the knowledge and the skill sets.
Hey, Kristen.
Okay, I'm sorry,
address
Kristen.
that?
Yeah, David, I'd like Kristen to actually respond to that. But my fundamental question was, how do you two feel as though our schools, like from a segregation of our schools standpoint, do they reflect better than they did when we had an elected school committee versus when we have an appointed school committee? I have looked at the numbers, and I'm not an expert, but it looks like segregation of our schools has increased since the 90s as opposed to now. And I don't know if that's because of this. I'm just asking the question.
So it's a fascinating question, and thank you for asking it. I went a couple years ago to a presentation at the Boston Foundation, and I think it was the third consecutive huge report about how we are almost as segregated as we were in the 70s. And we have report after report, and this current school committee structure has received, I think, 4 similar reports, and they've done literally nothing about the intense hypersegregations. And so what I mean by that is hypersegregation is defined by 90% of students at particular schools are of one concentrated race. And so we are back again to a place of schools that are 90% white and 90% people of color. So this appointed school committee has done exactly nothing to change that. And so it's one of my passion projects. So at the Boston Foundation, everyone was like clutching their pearls about how we can fix this, and nobody ever considered our school committee, the policy-making body of Boston Public Schools, as the forum where these discussions and these changes would be happening. And it's just, in my mind, a failure of leadership of our school committee that we just shrug and we're not going to do anything about it.
Hey,
I would argue the elected school committee didn't do anything about it either. And I'm not-
Hold on, but everybody, unfortunately, I can tell the questions and feelings are running high on this question. We've already gone over our budget of time. We have some guests who need to speak to us for a couple of minutes. So I know that other people were waiting to ask questions. We're going to have to take that offline and do the best we can. I thank the people who have spoken about this to this point, and
Great.
I want to wrap it up at this point.
So David, should they put their questions in the chat, and then the two
That would be
speakers
good.
could answer, or how would we want to handle that?
I think that would be the best way. Anybody who has a question outstanding, put it in the chat window. We'll be pending the chat it'll be part of the minutes, and then people will be able to get answers that way as well. Okay, I'm sorry again. I'm sorry for the time, for running over time about like that. I'm going to turn off the recording of the session now and hand it back to Karen to take the rest of the agenda.